So I'm here with Paul Wilkinson. Can I call you a construction collaboration expert?
Yeah, can do, yeah. It sort of describes what my major interest has been for about the last 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. And that's across architecture, engineering and construction.
The whole built environment piece.
Yeah. And you write a pretty popular blog here in the UK called Extranet Evolution.
I wrote a book in 2005 and that started a blog around the same time. So it's now almost 13 years later, and Extranet Evolution is still going.
And that's specifically just about collaboration within the building.
Particularly about collaboration. It started off looking at, as the title implies, looking at extranets, as we then described them, as the technology sector has expanded, incorporated mobile technologies and social media, and in particular building information modelling. I've started to look at a much wider range of technologies, looking right out, not just on the construction piece, but out into facilities management as well.
So I wanted to start this interview just by really getting an overview, a flavour about what you see as the current state of collaboration technologies in construction.
Current state is one of intense change, really. We've had the BIM movement going on in the UK for at least the last 8 years in earnest, and longer if we look at the developments before that. We've got growing interest in the cloud, I'm pleased to say. I was riding that crest of a wave 20 years ago.
Yeah, right.
It's happening now, so more and more stuff happening on the web. And we're also seeing technology finally being embraced, a bit of digital transformation beginning to happen in the construction industry. It lags a long way behind other industry sectors. Yeah. McKinsey and others have done numerous reports about the low level of digitisation in construction, and it's finally beginning to happen.
Okay, good news then. Specifically BIM, again, could you maybe characterise about what how it's being used in the UK at the moment, what level we're at?
Yeah, the BIM programme was sort of predicated on achieving what we call level 2 BIM by April 2016. We're now nearly 2 years on from that. That original mandate was aimed at public sector projects, but we also had quite a level of adoption by private sector clients, large retailers, transport undertakings and others. And a lot of the expected productivity gains and cost savings were delivered through that BIM programme. We're now in a process really of consolidating those steps and trying to extend the number of organisations which are working at level 2 beyond the current stage. We're probably only about a quarter of the way there. The ambition for the UK BIM Alliance, which is the main body driving us forward on level 2, is to try and get us towards more like 3/4 of the industry adopting BIM level 2, probably in the next 2 years, by about 2020, let's say.
Where do you think the UK sits in comparison to other countries? Specifically, I guess, Europe, North America.
I spoke to somebody yesterday. He says in America, he thought the UK was well ahead of them. I talked before Christmas to somebody from Scandinavia who, was sort of looking at the UK as the next big market because they are already well ahead in certain markets. He came from Denmark. He talked about experiences in Norway and Finland and said there's a lot of BIM adoption in those marketplaces. They're smaller marketplaces with a larger public sector. So BIM adoption in those places is probably slightly easier. But the UK is probably ahead of many of the other central and mainland, so central European countries when it comes to BIM.
Okay. That'll be interesting, I guess, to see in the future, where it takes us. But we can talk a bit about that, and I'll have a question about that later. I was going to ask, is there still a disconnect between disciplines in construction? It's something that we've written about from a technology perspective. And if there is, what sort of needs to change before the industry can actually start embracing, more technology like BIM?
The construction industry is quite siloed. It's been a problem in encouraging multidisciplinary collaboration for the best part of 25 years. My interest in collaboration in the industry started in 1994 when the Latham report came out. 4 years later, you had the Egan report. We've had report after report after report. 2016, another report, Mark Farmer, talking about modernise or die. And one of the issues that he talked about was the continued fragmentation and silo-based mentality of the industry. So we still have issues about sharing information between disciplines and working together effectively as project teams.
And is it going to continue indefinitely? I mean, are we seeing progress? I mean, it kind of sounds like not really.
I think there are signs of progress, some of which are enabled by technology, starting to get, and I think the Mark Farmer initiative has sparked interest in new ways of doing things, looking at things like design for manufacture and assembly, for example, which means a much more joined up approach between owners, the constructors, designers and the manufacturers, providing all the components and things for buildings. So that kind of initiative is helping. We've also started to see a bit of encouragement from central government to try and overcome some of the structural issues in the industry, and looking at incentivising the industry to change. So there's a bit of stick and carrot about it. Certainly the focus has shifted more towards backing more digital ways of doing things, rather than just relying upon the old traditional paper-based and adversarial ways of working.
Yeah. One thing I also wanted to ask you was about smart buildings, and that's really the focus of my work and where I come from. Sort of I guess also internal technology, occupancy tracking, HVAC control, that kind of thing. Do you see an appetite for more technology in buildings, and who is sort of driving that?
I think there is an appetite for more technology in buildings. We've got clients now, particularly major government clients, for example, much more conscious of the whole life cost of their buildings. If you're delivering a built asset, typically around about 15% of the whole life cost is embedded in the design and construction process. It's the other 85% where over the life cycle of that asset, most of the money is going to be spent. So you've got major client organisations like the government looking to reduce their whole life asset expenditure. And one of the ways they can do that is by producing or developing designs for buildings which are more energy efficient, which are more efficient at supporting the business processes that the assets are intended for. And in order to know that they're getting that efficient, they need to measure. So what gets measured gets managed. So incorporating the technologies into the built environment, so you've got smart meters, you've got technologies that enable us to track the flows of passengers through transport interchanges and all of those sorts of things. They have a bearing on how an asset is designed. So we can start to have feedback and feed forward loops from those smarter assets. And we're starting to see interest in that from the government. It's putting money behind what we've called for a long time BIM Level 3 or Digital Built Britain. In November last year, the Centre for Digital Built Britain opened at the University of Cambridge, and part of its ethos is about providing a stronger connection between BIM and smart cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's just such an excellent point. I think about you can't manage what you don't measure. And that, for me, is just one of the critical things about the Internet of Things, is that it provides that feedback loop. What I think is really interesting to me then is then how that data gets used to it, across the whole building. Who's responsible for it? And these are the things that I think really need to be sorted out. Who's responsible for that data? How does it really get used? What systems that data gets fed into, and these things I think that are still being ironed out.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking in construction at the moment. There's a debate about common data environments. At the moment, we tend to focus on a common data environment, imagining a platform that's been used for delivering design and construction. But the reality is that we need a common data, ultimately the client needs a common data environment for operating, managing and maintaining their facility. So the key requirement, certainly from some observers' point of view, is that the common data environment needs to be owned by the ultimate owner-operator, with the planners, designers, constructors and those involved perhaps in subcontracted facilities management and maintenance work invited into that common data environment whenever they need to make inputs, whether that's the initial design and construction processes or during processes of maintenance, upkeep, extension, refurbishment and so on.
I just wanted to dig into that last question a bit. I mean, you sort of mentioned there about some of the public sector using or being interested in obviously being more efficient about how they spend money in the construction process. And obviously one of the big things in the news recently was the demise of Carillion here in the UK. Is that an example of the government being too, or trying to give away too much control to private sector companies?
I think there was an ambition to get more bang for your buck by expecting the private sector to be delivering things more efficiently than public agencies. The reality is that they've tried, in some cases, through vehicles like the PFI, to get consortia to bid for work, but unfortunately sometimes that work ends up being uneconomic. Carillion's demise has largely come down to a handful of major PFI projects, 2 major hospitals and a major highways project in Scotland. It's less about the facilities management side of things. Carillion, as well as being a constructor, is also an operator of an extensive range of facilities management services in hospitals, schools, the criminal justice sector and elsewhere. And many of those contracts are actually now being transferred. They haven't come to a gory end. But on the PFI side, certainly some of their joint venture partners are nursing some substantial financial losses as a result.
Yeah, it's kind of a sad chapter really, I think, for UK
Indeed.
construction.
Yes.
But yeah, we'll get through it. One of the things, having read your blog, you've recently, you've covered quite a lot of consolidation in, I would say, the SaaS collaboration space over the last few months, specifically things like Trimble buying eBuilder, Oracle bidding for Aconex. What do you think is behind that trend? What are we seeing here?
I think to some extent the consolidation has been going for a while at a very low level, but we're now starting to see a long overdue consolidation. Other market sector, other software sectors in more digitized industries have gone through a consolidation some years ago, because construction has to some extent lagged behind other sectors in its own digital transformation. The same kind of consolidation has also lagged. The other factor in all of this is just look at the sheer scale of the global construction industry, the global built environment industry. We're talking about an industry potentially worth, I think, $15 trillion by the mid part of the next decade, let's say. That's a big market to address. So in some cases, the merger and acquisition activity is to enable some of the existing players to become a bit bigger, take a competitor out of the space, maybe grow into a region, add new technology to their portfolio. The interesting one particularly is the Oracle acquisition of Aconex. Oracle already had Primavera and a business called, I've forgotten what the name is, Textura. Yeah, it had a business called Textura. And by adding Aconex to its portfolio, it's now got a much more rounded offering and also a much stronger cloud offering. Something which it's been promising its shareholders for a while. So it's one of the first big business software houses to start up a division specifically targeting the built environment.
Okay, which I guess is good news, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I wanted to switch back a little bit to BIM. And as I sort of mentioned before, coming from this more like a technology perspective, we see or have seen, and people I've talked to are really excited about the opportunity of BIM technology to create this, what they call effectively a digital twin of the building. And, that being actually fed with real-time data from sensors collecting, all sorts of different measurements in the building. How far away are we from kind of realising that?
As I said, I think construction is starting on its digital transformation from a relatively low point. McKinsey and others, make that very, very clear. We lag everything apart from agriculture and hunting, according to an American report. In Europe, we're right at the bottom. Put those reports to one side. There is an ambition. Level 3 the Digital Built Britain strategy that came out in 2015 envisaged a much more joined up approach where BIM becomes part of a much bigger technology stack. The strategy that Digital Built Britain put forward brought together the built environment strategy with a strategy for the digital economy and for the professional services sector in the UK as well. So we've now got a Centre for Digital Built Britain at Cambridge. Mark Bew, when I spoke to him in October, was talking about the alignment that we're already starting to get between BIM and the Smarter Cities agenda, where we can start to bring in things like the Internet of Things, data analytics, sensor technologies and so on, so that they're aligned and able to talk to one another. The UK is a leader in open data, so we have a strong track record in providing data sets that enable people to make some connected decisions, and we're starting to see some technologies come through already which enable BIM to be assessed in the context of, for example, GIS, geotagged, geolocated information about local socio-economic demographics, about the locations of listed buildings and sites of special scientific interest, and a whole host of other information which is in the public realm, but often not joined up, not connected, but by building APIs, by utilising technologies like the semantic web, the connected web, we can start to bring these things together and have a much more holistic view when it comes to planning and designing the built environment. So it's not just about buildings, it's about transport undertakings, infrastructure, water pipelines and telecom systems and all those other things as well.
Yeah, all the kind of data you need in the construction phase as well. Yeah, absolutely. If there was, or you had the opportunity to instantly fix something about the construction industry, what would it be? I've been frustrated going back to when I first entered the industry 30 years ago that the focus is often on just driving down costs and in some cases working adversarially, playing up on little advantages to make claims and inflate the costs and increase your margin. If we could make one major change, it would get the industry focused much more on whole life cost, making procurement decisions based on best value over the life cycle of a built asset,
That's something the government has started to talk about. There was some statements in the budget in November and in the industrial strategy that came out around the same time. How quickly that will become adopted more widely, I don't know. But if I make one change, it would be a shift to that whole that best value perspective.
Yeah, makes sense, definitely. If people want more information about what you write about and your and the blog.
Yeah, I blog at Extranet Evolution, all one word, .com. But you can often find me in magazines and things. I freelance for various publications and speak at conferences and things like that.
And you're on Twitter as well.
And I'm on Twitter. I'm at EE Paul on Twitter. Okay. Yes.
Good. Well, look, I just want to say thanks very much for taking the time and appreciate you sharing your insights.
No problem, Jim.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Cheers.